At my wedding, my father said, "You're no longer my daughter," then handed my sister the family business. The morning of my wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day. I stood at the window of the bridal suite, watching guests arrive at our family's church. Everything was exactly as I dreamed. White roses down the aisle, sunlight through stained glass, and string quartet music floating in the air. "Olivia, you look absolutely stunning," my mother said, adjusting my veil. "Your father is going to be so proud when he walks you down the aisle." I smiled, running my hands over my dress. After years of working alongside my father, learning every aspect of the Taylor family business, I was finally taking my place as his successor. The announcement would come during the reception, a wedding gift more precious than anything on our registry. While other teenagers went to parties, I studied business journals. While my friends traveled during college, I interned at our offices. While my younger sister Claire pursued her art without pressure, I had been groomed to take over. And I did it willingly, believing my father saw in me what I saw in myself: a leader. Claire, 2 years my junior, was among my bridesmaids. She hugged me tightly. "Ready to become Mrs. Harrison?" she asked, her smile genuine. I nodded, not knowing that in 3 hours, I would no longer be Olivia Taylor, daughter and heir, but simply Olivia, cut off and cast out. The ceremony began like a fairy tale. I stood at the back of the church, arm linked with my father's. "You've always made me proud, Olivia," he said. "Today is just the beginning." Those words would haunt me later. We proceeded down the aisle to where Michael, my fiancé, waited. Vows were exchanged, rings placed on fingers, and the kiss that sealed our union was met with applause from 300 guests. Family, friends, business associates, all there to witness our happiness. The reception was held at my family's estate, under a massive white tent adorned with twinkling lights. Dinner had been served, champagne was flowing, and the time had come for speeches. My father stood, tapping his glass for attention. "Today we celebrate not only the union of Olivia and Michael but also the future of the Taylor family," he began. I squeezed Michael's hand beneath the table. This was it, the announcement I had been waiting for. "For 30 years I have built Taylor Industries from the ground up," my father continued. "The time has come to pass the torch to the next generation." The room hummed with anticipation. I straightened in my chair, ready to accept my inheritance with grace. "Family is everything to me," he said, his voice suddenly harder. "Loyalty is everything. Trust is everything." A strange silence fell. I felt the first flutter of unease. "Which is why what I'm about to do is necessary. Painful but necessary." My father's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw something I had never seen before: contempt. "Olivia, I've learned about your plans. Your secret meetings with Westfield corporations. Your attempts to dismantle everything I've built." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I sat frozen, uncomprehending. What was he talking about? "I gave you everything," he continued. "Education, opportunity, my trust. And you plan to throw away my legacy the moment you gained control." "Dad, I don't." I began, rising shakily. He cut me off. "I have evidence. Emails. Recorded conversations. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" The room was spinning. Michael stood beside me, confused. I looked desperately at my mother, who had gone pale, eyes fixed on her plate. "Therefore," my father continued, "as of today, you're no longer my daughter." The words hit me like physical blows. Not his daughter. How could he say that? He turned then to Claire, who looked as shocked as everyone. "Claire, you have always been loyal. The Taylor family business will pass to you, effective immediately." He pulled an envelope from his jacket and handed it to my sister. Claire took it with trembling hands, her eyes wide. "Dad, there's been a mistake," I said, my voice breaking. "I would never." "The documents are signed," he cut me off. "My decision is final. I suggest you and your husband enjoy your honeymoon. Consider it a parting gift." I stood there in my wedding dress, before hundreds of witnesses, publicly disowned and disinherited. The murmuring grew louder, faces turned toward me with pity, shock, and in some cases satisfaction. Competitors who had always seen me as too young, too female, too ambitious were poorly hiding their smirks. Michael took my hand. "Let's go," he whispered. "This is insane. We'll sort it out later." But I couldn't move. "Why?" I managed to ask, my voice small but clear. My father's face was stone. "You know why. Don't make this worse, Olivia." But I didn't know. I had never met with Westfield. I had never planned to dismantle anything. Something broke inside me then. I yanked my hand from Michael's and stepped toward my father. "You're wrong," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Whatever you think I've done, you're wrong. And one day you'll realize that. But it will be too late." With that, I walked out, head high despite my tears, despite the whispers that followed me. Michael hurried after me, but I couldn't stop. I ran out of the tent, across the lawn where I had played as a child, past my mother's rose garden, down to the small lake at the edge of the property. There, I collapsed onto a bench, my wedding dress pooling around me like a deflated dream. Michael found me minutes later. "We'll talk to him tomorrow when he's calmed down." But I knew better. I knew my father. Once he made a decision, he never reversed it. "No," I said, my voice hollow. "There's nothing to talk about. It's done." "Then we'll fight it," Michael insisted. "Legally, if we have to." I shook my head. "He'll have made sure everything is airtight." "What do you want to do?" Michael finally asked. I looked at the lights of the house reflected on the water, rippling and distorted. Just like my perception of my family had become in one cruel instant. "I want to leave," I said, forming a vow. "I never want to see any of them again." And in that moment, I made another silent promise. One day, I would understand what had happened. One day, I would discover the truth. And one day, I would return. Not as the daughter who had been cast out, but as someone with nothing left to lose. The morning after my wedding, I woke up in a hotel room, not as a newlywed embarking on a joyful honeymoon, but as an exile. Michael slept beside me, his face troubled even in sleep. I slipped out of bed and stood at the window, watching the sun rise over a city that suddenly felt foreign to me. We didn't go on our honeymoon to the Maldives. Instead, we used the money we'd received as wedding gifts to make a down payment on a small apartment in Seattle, 2,000 miles away from my family in Boston. Far enough that I wouldn't accidentally run into my father at a business lunch or see Claire's face splashed across the business section of the newspaper. Far enough to start over. The first few months were the hardest. I would wake up gasping for air, the echo of my father's words, "You're no longer my daughter," ringing in my ears. Sometimes I would reach for my phone, muscle memory compelling me to call him, to demand an explanation, to plead my case. But I never did. Pride, that damnable Taylor family trait, wouldn't let me. Instead, I poured myself into building a new life. With my business degree and experience working at Taylor Industries, I should have been able to land a decent job easily. But Boston's business community was tight-knit, and word of my public disgrace had spread. References that should have been glowing came back lukewarm. Former colleagues who had once laughed at my jokes now wouldn't return my calls. I was tainted. Damaged goods. Taylor in name only. After a dozen rejections, I took a job as an assistant marketing manager at a small tech startup. The pay was less than half what I was worth. The office was a converted warehouse with spotty heating, and my boss was 10 years my junior with half my education. But it was a foot in the door, a way back into the business world I understood. Michael supported me through it all. He had given up a promising legal career in Boston to move with me, taking a position at a smaller firm in Seattle with fewer opportunities for advancement. He never complained, though I sometimes caught him looking at job listings back east when he thought I wasn't watching. "Are you happy?" I asked him one night 6 months after we'd moved. We were eating takeout on our second-hand couch, watching rain streak down the windows of our apartment. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I'm happy with you. The rest is just circumstance. It'll get better." I wasn't sure I believed him, but I desperately wanted to. We had lost so much. Not just my inheritance, but our friends, our community, the future we had planned together. Sometimes I wondered if he resented me for it. This seismic shift in our lives caused by a family drama he had married into. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into every project, stayed late, came in early, and volunteered for tasks no one else wanted. Slowly I began to climb again. Assistant manager became manager. Manager became director. With each step up, I felt a small flame of vindication burn brighter inside me. At night, I would sometimes search online for news of Taylor Industries. I told myself it was professional curiosity, nothing more. But the truth was I needed to know. Needed to see what Claire was doing with my birthright. The reports were glowing at first. Taylor Industries under new leadership expands into European markets. Claire Taylor named one of 30 under 30-foot business leaders to watch. Each headline was a knife twist, each accompanying photo of my sister. Confident, polished, successful, a reminder of all I had lost. I kept tabs on my mother too, though it hurt more somehow. She had never reached out after that night, never called to check if I was okay, never defended me against my father's accusations. Her social media showed a woman going through the motions. Charity galas, garden club meetings, holiday celebrations. Her smile never quite reaching her eyes. I wondered if she missed me. I wondered if she believed what my father had claimed. 2 years passed this way, with Seattle becoming home and my career slowly rebuilding. The sharp edges of betrayal had dulled to a constant, manageable ache. Then came the day that changed everything. I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Taylor Industries faces hostile takeover bid from Westfield Corporations. I excused myself, locked myself in a bathroom stall, and read the article with shaking hands. Westfield. The very company my father had accused me of colluding with. The company I'd never had any contact with. And now they were making a move on Taylor Industries. The article detailed how Claire was fighting the takeover, how the company's stock had dropped after 3 consecutive quarters of declining profits, how industry analysts were questioning her leadership abilities. There was even a quote from my father, defending his decision to place her at the helm despite her relative inexperience. Something cold and calculating unfurled inside me. If I wasn't the traitor my father had named me, then who was? And if Westfield had indeed had an inside source at Taylor Industries, someone feeding them information, preparing them for this moment. I spent that night digging deeper. Financial reports, press releases, industry gossip forums. Anything I could find about both companies. A pattern began to emerge. Subtle but unmistakable. Decisions Claire had made that seemed odd at the time now appeared strategic, but not in Taylor Industries' favor. 5 years had passed since my wedding day disaster. From my modest Seattle apartment, I sat at my computer, reviewing the latest quarterly report from Taylor Industries. The screen cast a blue glow across my face as I scrolled through numbers that told a story few others could read. Claire was struggling. Not openly, not obviously, but the signs were there if you knew where to look. Inventory turnover had slowed. Customer acquisition costs were rising. Employee retention had dropped 12% in 2 quarters. I closed the laptop and gazed out at the Seattle skyline. Michael and I had divorced 3 years ago. Another casualty of my father's betrayal. The distance, the stress, the person I had become. It was too much for our marriage. He had returned to Boston, and I remained, building my consulting firm specializing in corporate restructuring. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, a former Taylor Industries executive who had quit shortly after Claire took over. Spoke to Jensen today. Claire's decision to cancel the Singapore expansion has him worried. Board meeting next week. I smiled faintly. Marcus had been loyal to me, one of the few who had reached out after my exile. Now he was my eyes and ears at Taylor Industries, though he never knew the full extent of how I used his information. It had begun innocently enough. A lunch with a former colleague who mentioned Claire's management style was different from what they expected. A casual email to a vendor who complained about new contract terms. Small conversations that revealed cracks in Claire's leadership. Then I became more deliberate. I arranged to meet with Keith Weber, who had been Taylor Industries' CFO for 20 years. "I'm not here to discuss the past," I told him over coffee. "I just want to understand how things are going. For my own closure." Keith, always fond of me, spoke freely. "Your sister is enthusiastic. But between us, Olivia, she's making changes without understanding the foundations." The Westfield situation left everyone shaken. "Westfield," I repeated, the name still triggering a flash of anger. "What exactly happened there?" "Someone leaked our acquisition plans for Hammond Tech." Westfield swooped in, offered more and took the deal. It was a major blow. "Your father blamed me," I finished. "He blamed me." Keith looked uncomfortable. "There was an email trail from your account." This revelation had been the missing piece. Someone had set me up. Someone who wanted me out and Claire in. After that conversation, my approach changed. This wasn't just about watching anymore. It was about justice and perhaps revenge. I began with subtle interventions. When Claire hired a new marketing director, I reached out to the candidate who had been passed over, a brilliant strategist named Veronica, and brought her into my firm. Together, we developed campaign strategies that directly countered Taylor Industries' efforts in key markets. When Claire launched a new product line, I quietly consulted with their main competitor, helping them identify weaknesses in the rollout. I never mentioned my connection to Taylor Industries. I was simply a consultant doing my job exceptionally well. I cultivated relationships with industry journalists, feeding them stories that highlighted innovation elsewhere while subtly questioning Taylor Industries' direction. Not direct criticism, that would be too obvious, but context that made Claire's decisions look increasingly out of touch. Through Marcus and others still at the company, I learned about internal politics. Who was loyal to Claire, who was skeptical. I focused on the latter group, arranging chance meetings at industry events, offering career advice, sometimes even job opportunities. The exodus of talent was slow but steady, each departure making Claire's job harder. The most effective tactic, however, was simply letting Claire be Claire. She had inherited our father's stubbornness but not his business instinct. When advisors cautioned against certain moves, she pushed harder. When challenges arose, she blamed others. Pride, the Taylor family curse. I watched from a distance as she rejected a partnership that would have strengthened their position in emerging markets. I said nothing when she invested heavily in technology that industry experts considered outdated. I simply observed as she surrounded herself with yes men and women who reinforced her misguided confidence. My biggest triumph came when Claire hired James Mackenzie as her CFO. James didn't know that his sister-in-law worked for my firm, or that I had specifically recommended him to Marcus as someone Claire might trust. James was competent but cautious, risk-averse in ways that would temper Claire's impulsive decisions just enough to keep the company afloat but never thriving. "You're playing a long game," Veronica commented one evening as we reviewed client reports, including one from a major Taylor Industries customer who was considering switching to us. "I'm not playing anything," I replied. "I'm building my own success." But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. With each small move, I was tightening a noose around the company my father had built and the sister who had taken my place. Not by direct attack but by 1,000 small cuts. The latest financial reports showed Taylor Industries had lost market share for the third consecutive quarter. Claire had responded by announcing an aggressive expansion plan that analysts were already questioning. The company's stock had dropped 7%. I closed the file and poured myself a glass of wine. Tomorrow, I would have lunch with the procurement director of Taylor Industries' largest client. The day after, I would meet with a venture capitalist looking to fund direct competitors in their space. I wasn't destroying the company. I was simply removing the supports, one by one, and waiting for Claire's own decisions to bring the structure down. When it finally collapsed, I would be ready, not to claim what was once promised to me, but to show my father exactly what he had thrown away. The quiet manipulation was working. And soon, very soon, it would be time for the next phase. 8 years after my wedding day, I stood in my corner office overlooking Seattle's bustling financial district. My consulting firm, Phoenix Strategy, had grown from a one-woman operation to a respected boutique agency with 30 employees and a waitlist of clients. The irony wasn't lost on me that several of those clients were direct competitors to Taylor Industries. My assistant knocked and entered with the morning's business news. "Thought you'd want to see this right away," she said, handing me a tablet. The headline made my coffee turn bitter in my mouth. Taylor Industries loses key aerospace contract. Stock plummets 15%. I skimmed the article, which detailed how Claire had personally overseen the bid for a major contract that would have secured Taylor Industries' position in the aerospace sector for the next decade. The contract had instead gone to Hammond Aeronautics, a client of mine. What the article didn't mention was how I had spent 6 months coaching Hammond's executive team on their proposal, identifying Taylor Industries' likely strategy based on inside information from Marcus and others. I had helped Hammond directly counter every advantage my family's company might have had. My phone rang. It was Diane Jensen, Taylor Industries' former VP of Operations, who now worked as my senior consultant. "Have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. "Just reading it now," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Tough break for Claire." "It's worse than the article suggests," Diane said, lowering her voice though she was calling from her home office. "My contacts say the board is meeting tomorrow. There's talk of asking Claire to step down." I felt a flicker of satisfaction, quickly suppressed. "That seems premature. One lost contract." "It's not just that," Diane interrupted. "It's everything. The failed European expansion. The lawsuits from that product recall last year. The exodus of senior talent. Even your father is starting to question her leadership, though he'll never admit it publicly." After hanging up, I walked to the window, watching rain streak down the glass. Claire's downfall wasn't my doing alone. She had made genuinely poor decisions. But I had been there at every turn, quietly exploiting each mistake, amplifying each error. Like a chess player thinking 5 moves ahead, I had positioned myself and my allies to benefit from her failures. When Claire refused to update their manufacturing technology, claiming it was an unnecessary expense, I'd connected their largest competitors with cutting-edge solutions that reduced costs by 30%. When she alienated their head of product development with her micromanagement, I'd hired him and gained access to their product roadmap for the next 3 years. When she ignored warnings about quality control issues, I'd made sure industry journalists heard about the first complaints. Never direct sabotage, just strategic pressure at points where Claire was already weak. By afternoon, I had 3 voicemails from former Taylor Industries executives seeking meetings. The vultures were circling, and everyone wanted to be positioned advantageously for whatever came next. I returned none of the calls. Let them wonder where I stood. That evening, as I reviewed proposals in my apartment, I received an unexpected text from my mother. "Claire's in trouble. Your father won't listen to reason. Maybe you could help." I stared at the message for a long time. It was the first direct communication from my mother in years. Anger and longing warred within me. I had mourned my family for so long, hardened myself against the pain of their rejection. Now my mother reached out, not to apologize, not to make amends, but to ask me to help the sister who had taken everything from me. I set the phone down without replying. Let them feel a fraction of the helplessness I had felt. The next day, financial news was dominated by Taylor Industries' crisis. The stock had fallen another 8%. Rumors swirled about potential bankruptcy if the company couldn't secure new financing to cover expanding debt. I called Marcus, who had recently been laid off in Claire's latest cost-cutting measure. "What's the mood inside?" I asked. "Chaos," he replied. "Claire's blaming everyone, the sales team, marketing, even the economy. She called an all-hands meeting yesterday and spent an hour explaining how external factors were responsible for our losses. Nobody's buying it. And my father." Marcus hesitated. "He's not well, Olivia. The stress is taking a toll. He still defends Claire publicly, but I heard him shouting at her in his office last week. Something twisted inside me, a knot of emotions I thought I had mastered long ago. What about the Singapore project? I asked, changing the subject to one of Claire's largest initiatives, an expansion into Asian markets that I knew was failing spectacularly. Dead in the water. The local partner pulled out after the aerospace contract news broke. I ended the call and sat with this information, mentally calculating how it would affect other players in the industry. Then I picked up the phone and called Hammond Aeronautics. Your company just won a major contract, I said to their CEO. Have you considered that this might be the perfect time to acquire struggling suppliers? I have some thoughts on a potential target. Within 2 hours, I had set in motion a strategy that could result in Hammond acquiring key divisions of Taylor Industries at bargain prices. Not the entire company, that would be too obvious, but enough to cripple what remained. The satisfaction I expected to feel never came. Instead, a strange hollowness settled in my chest as I realized how close I was to completing the destruction I had set in motion. Claire had made it easy with her incompetence, her arrogance, her refusal to acknowledge her limitations. But the company that was collapsing had been built by my father, had been meant to be my legacy. For the first time, I wondered if my revenge had taken me too far. Not because Claire didn't deserve to fail, she did, but because in orchestrating her downfall, I had become someone I barely recognized. My phone lit up with another text from my mother. Please, Olivia. Family is family. This time I typed a reply. I stopped being family 8 years ago. The call came at 3:17 a.m., jolting me from sleep. My mother's voice, tight with panic, cut through the darkness. Your father's had a heart attack. They've taken him to Massachusetts General. I sat up, instantly alert. Is he? He's stable, she said. But it's serious, Olivia. The doctors say the stress. She trailed off, the implication clear. I'll book a flight, I said, surprising myself with the immediacy of my decision. 10 hours later, I walked through the sliding doors of the hospital where I was born, feeling like a stranger in my hometown. Boston in autumn was just as I remembered. Crisp air, yellowing leaves, the Charles River gleaming in the distance. I hesitated outside my father's hospital room, steeling myself. 9 years of anger and hurt couldn't be set aside easily, but something beyond revenge had drawn me back. Perhaps a need for closure, or some stubborn remnant of the daughter I once was. When I entered, my mother rose from her chair, aged beyond her years. She embraced me wordlessly, her body frail in my arms. My father lay still, connected to machines that beeped steadily, mapping the fragile rhythm of his heart. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by illness and time. Where's Claire? Yes. At the office. There's a crisis with the Richardson deal. It's falling apart, and she says she can't leave. My mother's voice carried a note of resigned disappointment. I nodded, unsurprised. The Richardson partnership had been Taylor Industries' last hope of salvation, a joint venture that would inject much-needed capital and open new markets. My intelligence network had informed me of the negotiations weeks ago, and I had purposely avoided interfering. Some failures should come naturally. I spent the afternoon by my father's bedside while my mother rested at home. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes confused. During one clear moment, his eyes focused on me with shock. "Olivia," he whispered hoarsely. "Hello, father." I kept my voice neutral, though my heart raced. He studied my face. "You look different." 9 years will do that, I replied. He closed his eyes, whether from fatigue or regret I couldn't tell. "Claire's in trouble." "So I've heard." He tried to sit up, then winced in pain. "The company, everything I built, it's slipping away." I should have felt triumphant. This was what I had worked toward, wasn't it? My father finally seeing Claire's failure, witnessing the collapse of the empire he had denied me. Instead, I felt a hollow ache. "Perhaps you should have considered that before giving it to someone unprepared to lead," I said, the words sharper than I intended. His face hardened, a glimpse of the formidable man he once was. I didn't have a choice. The evidence was fabricated, I finished. I never met with Westfield. I never planned to dismantle anything. Doubt flickered across his face. The emails could have been created by anyone with access to our systems. Someone who wanted me out and Claire in. Before he could respond, a commotion in the hallway interrupted us. Claire burst in, her designer clothes rumpled, dark circles under her eyes. She stopped short at the sight of me. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, looking to our father for explanation. "I called her," our mother said from the doorway, having returned from her break. "Family should be together at times like this." Claire's face flushed. "Family? She abandoned us. Disappeared for years while I've been trying to save what Dad built." "Trying and failing," I said coolly. "The Richardson deal is dead, isn't it?" Claire paled. "How did you know that?" "We just got the call an hour ago." I ignored the question. "What about the Chicago manufacturing plant? Have you told the employees they're being laid off next month? Or are you waiting until the last minute?" "How could you possibly?" Claire's voice rose in pitch. "Because unlike you," I interrupted, "I understand this business. I always did." Our father's monitor began beeping faster. A nurse hurried in, assessing his vitals with concern. "You need to take this outside," she said firmly. "He needs rest, not stress." In the sterile hallway, Claire rounded on me. "What are you really doing here, Olivia? Come to gloat?" I studied my sister, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time. The confident facade had cracked, revealing desperation beneath. She wasn't just failing, she was drowning. "The company is 3 weeks from bankruptcy," I said, not a question but a statement of fact. Claire deflated, leaning against the wall. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been watching, waiting. For 9 years I've tracked every mistake, every misstep." Her eyes widened with realization. "You've been working against us." "No," I replied truthfully. "I've simply been letting you fail on your own terms." My mother, who had followed us into the hallway, gasped softly. "Olivia, please. If you know something that could help." "Why should I help? When none of you helped me. When you all believed I was capable of betrayal without a shred of proof." My voice remained controlled, but old wounds throbbed beneath my words. Claire slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, head in her hands. "It doesn't matter whose fault it is anymore. We're going to lose everything. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. Dad's legacy will be destroyed." I looked at her, then at my mother's pleading eyes, then through the door at my father's diminished form. 9 years ago, I had promised myself revenge. I had imagined this moment, my family brought low, finally recognizing what they had thrown away. But the reality brought no satisfaction. "I need to see the books," I said abruptly. "All of them. Now." Claire looked up, confusion replacing despair. "Why?" "Because," I said, making a decision I hadn't known I was going to make until that moment, "I'm not going to let our father's company die. Not even to prove a point." The Taylor Industries headquarters hadn't changed much in 9 years. Same sleek glass tower, same imposing lobby with its marble floor and wall of achievement awards. But as I walked through the entrance at 7 a.m., security badge clipped to my blazer, the energy was different. Fearful. Employees stared as I passed, whispers following in my wake. "That's her, the daughter who was disowned. I heard she's been running a rival firm. Is she here to buy us out?" I ignored them, taking the executive elevator to the top floor where Claire had maintained our father's office. For the past 3 days, I had immersed myself in the company's finances, operations, and personnel files. The situation was worse than even I had anticipated. Taylor Industries wasn't just struggling, it was hemorrhaging. The executive suite was empty when I arrived, except for Margaret, my father's longtime assistant, now in her 70s but still impeccably put together. "Miss Taylor," she said, a genuine smile warming her face. "It's been too long." "Hello, Margaret. Is the conference room ready?" "Yes, everything as you requested. The executive team will arrive at 8. She hesitated. "They're nervous." "They should be," I replied, but softened it with a small smile. I spent the next hour reviewing my notes. At precisely 8 o'clock, the leadership team filed in. 6 men and 2 women, most of whom I didn't recognize. Claire entered last, dark circles under her eyes, her usual confidence notably absent. Without preamble, I stood and addressed the room. For those who don't know me, I'm Olivia Taylor. 9 years ago, I was publicly disowned and disinherited by my father. Today, I'm here because this company, my family's legacy, is 24 days from bankruptcy. The room tensed. Some exchanged glances, others stared at their hands. Claire's jaw tightened. "I've reviewed the company's situation," I continued. "The Richardson deal collapsing was your final lifeline. You've lost market share in your core business. Employee morale is at an all-time low. Client confidence is shattered." "We know all this," said a gray-haired man I recognized as the new CFO. "What we need are solutions, not a recap of our failures." I fixed him with a steady gaze. "The solution began the moment I walked through that door, Mr. Decker. Whether you realize it or not." Over the next hour I laid out my plan. First, immediate stabilization. A bridge loan from my own company to meet the next payroll and critical vendor payments. Then, strategic reorganization, eliminating redundancies, refocusing on core competencies, rebuilding client relationships. "This isn't just about survival," I explained. "It's about remembering what made Taylor Industries great in the first place: innovation, integrity, and long-term thinking." I turned to Claire, who had remained silent throughout. "The Hammond acquisition offer that comes in tomorrow. Reject it. They're lowballing because they think we're desperate." Her eyes widened. "How did you know about that?" "They haven't even." "I know because I helped orchestrate it," I said flatly. "Just as I've had a hand in many of the challenges you've faced." The room fell silent, all eyes darting between Claire and me. "You're admitting you sabotaged us?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm admitting I watched you make mistakes and capitalized on them," I corrected. "I didn't create your problems. I simply made sure they cost you as much as possible." For a moment, I thought Claire might lunge across the table at me. Instead, she laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "So all this," she gestured to my notes, my plans, "is what? More sabotage?" "No," I said simply. "It's me choosing to save what matters more than revenge." The meeting continued, decisions were made, tasks assigned. By noon, the first phase of the rescue plan was in motion. I stayed at headquarters, working from a small conference room rather than claiming an office. This wasn't about reclaiming territory. It was about effectiveness. 3 days later, my father was released from the hospital. Against doctor's orders, he came directly to the office. I was reviewing contracts when he appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on a cane, my mother hovering anxiously behind him. "You're still here," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "I am," I replied, setting down my pen. He entered slowly, lowering himself into a chair across from me. "Margaret says you've taken charge. That you're turning things around." "I'm trying." He studied me, this man who had broken my heart and reshaped my life with a few cruel words. He looked older, diminished, yet still carried himself with the dignity I had once admired. "Why?" he asked simply. I considered the question. The honest answer surprised even me. "Because destroying something is easy. Building it, sustaining it, that's the real challenge. And I've never been one to back down from a challenge." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "No, you haven't." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. 9 years of anger and hurt, impossible to bridge in one conversation. Finally he spoke again. "The emails. The evidence against you. I've been wondering. Was it Claire? I shook my head. No, it was Jerome Dixon, my father's former right-hand man, who had conveniently retired shortly after Claire took over. He wanted Claire in charge because he knew he could influence her, control her, essentially. My father closed his eyes, pain crossing his features that had nothing to do with his heart condition. I was wrong, he said quietly. About you. About everything. The words I had waited 9 years to hear. Yet they brought no triumph, only a quiet sadness for what had been lost. Yes, I agreed. You were. I stood gathering my papers. I have a meeting with the International Division. Excuse me. As I reached the door, my father called after me. Will you stay? After the crisis is managed. I paused, looking back at the man who had once been my hero, then my villain, and now was simply a flawed human being who had made a terrible mistake. I haven't decided yet, I answered truthfully. But either way, I'll make sure Taylor Industries survives. That's my revenge, proving I was always the right choice, not by destroying what you built, but by saving it.